All right, we got another Supreme Court case we want to look at. We spent some time earlier looking at the Dred Scott case. We're going to skip ahead about 40 years and look at another case called Plessy versus Ferguson. This is the case, if you're looking for a significance, this is the case that is going to set up a segregated society in the southern part of the United States. Got a picture there for you on the screen of a drinking fountain. You see the white drinking fountain and the colored drinking fountain. That is not for white water and colored water. That was for a separation of the races. Colored was kind of the accepted term back then for African Americans. And so let's see how this sets up this segregated society. In 1890, Louisiana passed a law called the Separate Car Act, and it was for trains. And basically, the idea was that they would have separate cars. See, history's easy for white passengers and for black passengers. So if you were white, you had to buy a ticket and ride on the white cars. If you were black, you had to ride on the black cars. And so just kind of acceptable, or that was legal back then. But enter a guy named Homer Plessy. Homer Plessy was a man who was 1/8 black, and that's important because that was the minimum requirement to be considered black. So that's one great grandparent who was black was enough to have you considered to be black, and so he was didn't look the part enough not to be able to buy the white ticket. He buys a white ticket or ticket for the white car, but when he gets on the white car, somebody sees him that knows him and says, "No, this guy shouldn't be here," and so he refuses to get off of the train. And so when they take him off the train, they arrest him, and he is told he's either going to go to jail or pay a fine. And what he's going to do is he is going to sue to get try and get the law overturned. Now, as you can see here, this is not an actual picture of Homer Plessy, but a dramatic artist rendition of that. You don't see that in a lot of places. The court ruled in an 8-1 decision that basically you could have separate facilities as long as they're equal. So what you want to kind of get in your head when you think about the Plessy versus Ferguson case is the idea of separate but equal. And so the 14th Amendment, when you're reading the Constitution last night before you went to bed, the 14th Amendment says that everyone's entitled to equal protection under the law. And so as long you could have separate facilities, as the Supreme Court said, as long as those facilities were equal. The problem is that's not going to be the case. But what Plessy versus Ferguson does, and I think it's an 1896 decision by the time the court case gets finished, is it sets up this segregated society. Now, take a look at the makeup of the Supreme Court there, and yes, it is a bunch of old white dudes, because that's basically who was on the Supreme Court until the 1960s. So what separate but equal does is it extends out to every part of life in the southern United States. We saw the water fountains. You can see there on the left a picture of a movie theater. A lot of times in theaters, they would have a colored balcony, and the idea basically was you had to have some type of separation for the races. A lot of times in the South, you ever seen like the movie Remember the Titans? It's like this. You couldn't, if you were black, you couldn't go and sit in a restaurant. You could order something, get it from kind of the back door and take it home, but there wasn't seating for folks that were of color into those places. And so really from 1896 up until 1964, when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is passed, segregation is legal in the United States. It'll be challenged several times before then. They desegregate the military in the 1940s. Schools will be desegregated in the 1950s. But really in practice, things are segregated in this country until the early 1970s. And to give you an idea of the early 1970s, I mean, that's 5-6 years after Mrs. Bray was born. They are still having uh, segregation was still there. She's doing that. She's trying really hard not to laugh. She's sitting here while I'm recording this. But ask her about it sometime. She'd be glad to tell you. By 1907, every southern state required segregation. So even if you didn't want to do this business, or you were required to have separate facilities on trains, in churches, schools, hotels, restaurants, theaters, any other public place, you were required by law to keep those separate. And so things won't change until we get to the 1960s. But Plessy versus Ferguson is the court case that sets that all up.